week's edition of Tom's Trains and What's on the Workbench. Today we'll be looking back at what I've been doing over the last week or so, and we'll also be doing the weathering on the W1. I thought I'd show you how I go about doing the weathering on that particular locomotive, or try to anyway. Thought I'd appear on camera just to mix things up a bit and change the format of the show, try and find out what works really, what people like, what people don't like, and also gives me the opportunity to make it a little bit more interactive as well. One of the comments that I had from Gary this week was that he loved the work on the C12, which I showed on RM Web, which is this fellow here. So thank you very much for that. And he said, well, how was the kit to build? Well, it was a pretty good build actually. Being white metal, it went together quite quickly. There's only a slight problem. I don't know whether it's specific to white metal kits, it might be, but some of the parts are just ever so slightly bowed. So before you actually make them, it's a good idea just to make sure that they are true and flat. Otherwise you're building the kit and you're compounding your errors. I think that's what I did a little bit because the cab roof was a little bit hard to fit. Couldn't quite get it square, I don't think. To be honest, I'm not even sure now whether it's fully square. It looks okay, but you know, it's just one of those things. So again, taking your time with these kits is really, really important. The other thing that I did was knock off the beading on the cab tender on the cab side, on the tank side, I should say. Again, that's really my own fault. It was a little bit sort of scrappy anyway, so got rid of it and replaced it with brass rod. A little bit of a fiddly job, but I think it was worth it in the end, and I turned out with a reasonably nice looking locomotive. So the other thing to mention, of course, is that Dave Ellis is a really top bloke. So if you've got any questions, if you do buy a kit from him, if you ask any questions to him, he'll get back to you straight away, and he's very, very helpful. So highly recommended on that one. The other thing that I've been doing is working on the London Road Models J3. We've got this to a stage now where we have a fully working chassis. We have formed the boiler itself, put the smoke box wrappers on, which is always a bit of a fiddly job, I find. You need quite a lot of heat. So I've just got those fitted now onto there. I've also done quite a lot of work on the footplate. All of these bits have to be soldered on individually, so it does take a little bit of time. Formed up the cab roof, that was a bit of a tricky thing to do. Just making sure that's actually square on there. It is square, I have checked it. So that's all been done, and it does take a little while. It's the chassis is obviously done, the motor and gearbox are made as well. That's a high level kit's gearbox on there, and the tender's sort of in a rolling chassis state as well. There's a few small issues with the kit. First of all, the frets for the etches are sometimes misnumbered, so you're trying to find a part and it doesn't quite tally up with what the instructions say. For example, there's 2 parts 29 which are totally different, so that's a bit frustrating. Also, the instructions are quite verbose, but they don't really always tell you what you need to know. Some bits are quite detailed and other bits are very sparse. So what would really help in a kit like this is a diagram. There's a few diagrams, but it's not really enough to help you build the kit. So it's one of those things, again, really, of taking your time, doing a lot of dry fitting, a lot of test fitting, making sure you're putting the right bit in the right place. The other thing that I found invaluable with this kit is to have a reference photo, because if you're in doubt, you just look at the picture and see, you know, what matches up with what, and that's quite a big help when you're building something like this. So having said all of that, it does actually build up into a very nice kit. You know, it's starting to really look like a J3 now, and you can see there already, even though that's just resting on there, that it looks quite nice. And I think once we, you know, get it to the stage of it being complete, it will look great. And the wonderful thing, of course, about brass is you get that really nice finesse. So all of the edges are nice and crisp and straight, and you just can't get that in plastic. You can't get that in white metal either. It's harder to achieve that effect in white metal, but a ready trunk kit won't have this level of finesse. And of course, we can detail it up from the word go and personalise it into the exact locomotive that we want. So I've done that. I've fitted the tapered buffers on there for my particular locomotive. It's a Doncaster engine, so it's got the sandbox on the driving axle at the rear, and then also a sandbox on the leading axle at the front there, facing forward. So we can really customise it and make it our own locomotive. Having said that as well, it's good fun. You know, it challenges your modelling, and that's what it's all about, really. So that's the J3. I've been really trying to work on this, trying to get it done. I'm going home beginning of May, back to the UK, so I don't know whether I'll be able to get it finished before then. I'd like to try and certainly get it done, maybe try and get it in primer if I possibly can. Yeah, it's going to be hard because I've got reserve coming up. I might get called out, and yeah, my time at the workbench is going to be a bit limited, so we'll have to see how we go on that. The next thing I want to talk about is weathering. Now, this is not the definitive how to do weathering, it's just how I tend to do it. I have experience before of using an airbrush from when I make model aeroplanes and things like that, so I might have a little bit of a head start in that respect, but you know, obviously, like all of my modelling, it's still a work in progress, really. To weather or not to weather, that is the question, really. I know some people don't weather their stock. For me, if you see a layout that's beautifully scenically made, and then you have a load of stock on it that's not weathered, that stock stands out like no man's business. You know, it just doesn't fit into the landscape. If you look at anything that's outside, it will to some extent weather. And if you think about a locomotive fresh out of shop, in pristine condition, as soon as it's outside and as soon as they fire up that boiler, you're going to get soot, smoke, debris falling onto that locomotive. If it's raining, you're going to get the water streaks starting to form. So immediately, as soon as something's outside that's a mechanical object, it's going to attract weathering. And so for me, weathering, absolutely. And what it does is makes things look as though they belong. It makes locomotives look as though they're working objects as opposed to being just a plastic object. There is an argument that some people say, well, you know, I spent a lot of money on a Hornby locomotive. You know, if I weather it, its second-hand value is a lot less. Well, look, I don't think you can think like that. I think you have to look at it, unless you want to keep it as a museum piece, it's a working item on your layout. It's doing a job. It's hauling carriages, it's hauling wagons. I would certainly weather it, and then worry, if you want to sell it on later, worry about that when you come to sell it on. For me, I think, you know, you enjoy the locomotive while you have it, you use it for what it's for, and you weather it and you make it look as realistic as you possibly can. Because like I say, you could have a beautiful scenic layout, but if it's just full of locomotives that look pristine, you're immediately giving the game away, in my opinion. We're trying to make things look realistic, and weathering really helps. The other thing it does is it just makes the locomotives look bulkier somehow. It makes them look heavy, makes them sort of sit on the track, and they look purposeful. So I think weathering's a great thing to do, and you can apply the techniques that we'll talk about to carriages, wagons, diesels, locos, buildings, you name it. If it's outside, you can weather it. So there's a few techniques I use. Most of it centres around the airbrush. Excuse me, I'll just show you the airbrush that I've got here. It's my Harder & Stiebeck Evolution 2-in-1. It's a dual action airbrush. I've had it for quite some time now. I just did a video on how to clean it and service it, and it's a really useful bit of kit. And most of my weathering is with the airbrush. However, I do use dry brushing, I use stippling, I use powders, all sorts of things to create the different effects. In terms of colours then, what you use, obviously it's entirely up to you, but if you think about how weathering happens, it's different layers building up over time. So it's not just one hit of one particular colour all over, and that's where pre-weathered stock from the manufacturers falls down, in my opinion, because weathering isn't just one colour, it's a process that builds up over time, lots of different colours, and there isn't one specific colour for brake dust, there isn't one specific colour for coal dust. It's an amalgam of what you choose to use. I use two different types of colours. I use acrylics, in this case Tamiyas, only because I've used them for many years. They go through the airbrush beautifully, they thin very nicely, they dry quickly, and they're good quality paints. And this is my permanent weathering. So this is things that I don't want to come off. So when I do the weathering, I also use enamel paints, and what I tend to do with enamel paints is spray it on and then clean it off with enamel thinners. The enamel paint will obviously come off, but the cellulose paint isn't affected by the enamel thinners, so that will stay on the Loco, and the enamel stuff will come off. We'll have a look at that later on when we do the weathering. But the colours that I use are really quite straightforward. You don't need that much. Good colour to use, Tamiya XF69, which is Nato black. It's kind of like an off black colour. Nothing in real life really is pure black or pure white, so that's quite a good substitute, very good for soot and dust. I also use X10 Gunmetal. Nice just to put a little bit of metallic into your weathering, just a tiny amount. It's got those little flecks of silver in there, and that kind of replicates the texture that you see from soot, from coal dust and things like that. So X10 is good. What else do we use? German grey, just a lighter version of the Nato black really. XF63. I do use black, flat black, XF1. A brown colour of some sort. I just happen to have XF64, and brown's good because it kind of adds a warmth. It kind of warms up colours a little bit and gives that hint of rust to things, so that's quite a useful colour. And then something that you may not have heard of before is X19 Smoke, which is a translucent colour. It's also gloss as well, and it's really good for, if you brush paint it, you can replicate water streaks because of the glossy nature of it, or you can use it through the airbrush to replicate sort of grease stains and oil stains, things like that. So this is quite a nice, useful colour, and being transparent, it's difficult to sort of overuse it. So that's a really useful colour. I use that quite a lot actually, and obviously it was originally intended for aircraft modelers to replicate smoke and oil and things like that, but we can use it in our train modelling as well. So that's it for the acrylic colours. Really, I've got 6 colours there, that's about all you need. As long as you can mix up gunky, grungy sort of colours, no problem at all. And then same for the Humbrol colours as well. Black, obviously, that's a Revell colour, number 7. And then I've got some greys here. This is number 32 from Humbrol. Number 70, just a sort of a browny kind of colour there. 62, this is quite a good colour. This is a leather colour that adds that sort of warmth again. Very good for sort of rusty areas. Just add it to your mix really to get that sort of mucky colour going. And then again, 53, which is a gunmetal colour again, and again that's just got that little bit of silver in it, which when you're stippling onto the underframes, we'll have a look at that later on, just helps to give that little bit of texture, a little bit of definition on there as well. So that's the enamel colours. I've only got 5 or 6 of those that I use really for my weathering. It's not a huge amount. I also use these Humbrol weathering powders. Dark earth I particularly like. Smoke's quite good as well, and I just apply the powders in areas that don't get touched by the human hand. The powders will rub off, so if you put them in areas where the Loco doesn't get touched, that's quite a good thing to do. I don't necessarily like having powder or glossing over powder, because then it changes the colour of it. For me, that's not particularly a great thing to do. I just like to leave it as it is. So that's that really. We'll cut to the workbench. I'll get everything set up for the weathering, and we'll have a look at weathering the W1. We'll start now with the weathering of the W1. I've broken it down into its constituent parts. We've got the body, the tender, the chassis here for the tender doesn't need any weathering, so we can get rid of that. And also the frame for the Loco itself. That chassis is pretty much hidden under the body of the locomotive, so we can get rid of that too. I've already weathered the motion on there, so that looks just about right. It may just be a very light spray over the top on the frames there, but there's really not much to worry about with that one at all, so we'll set that one aside for later as well. We'll start off with the front bogie. I'll just move the tender out of the way. We'll start off with the front bogie, and I remembered when I was thinking about weathering this, I remembered a trip I did to the North York Moors Railway a couple of years ago, and basically I remembered looking at Sir Nigel Gresney, and I looked at the frames of the Loco, and I remembered that they were covered in quite a lot of muck and grease. Even though it's a preserved Loco, it's in good condition, there was a lot of muck on those frames, so I'm just going to try and replicate a bit of that on the frames for this Loco. What you need in order to create this sort of textured effect is some talcum powder, and I've got some here, and our enamel paints. And what we're going to do is stipple it on and make a textured effect with it. Now, it's not my technique, it's Martin Welk's technique. It's from his book, The Art of Weathering, so full credit to him for doing this. I just came along and copied it basically, but I'll just show you. There's just a little bit on the frames there that we're going to work on. Just a small amount just on the front of the guard irons there. It's a very tiny area, but it just adds to that authenticity. So we shall start off with some black and maybe a little bit of grey as well. Let's shake that up. A little bit of our matte 62, a leather colour. And finally matte or metallic 53, our gunmetal colour. We start then just with a little bit of grey, I think, just on the frames, and we just get some on the oldest, rubbishest brush that you have, and we just start dabbing on a little bit of paint, just like that, quite thickly, just on the frames, just where you can see, a little bit on there as well on the front. And now we go in with our talcum powder, and just grab some on the end of the brush, and this is our texture. This is what creates the effect that you saw in the picture there. It kind of makes a bit of a mess. Just dab it in once more. And we start to get, as the paint soaks in with the talcum powder, we start to create texture. Like so. You need quite a lot, just keep working in there with the paint and the talcum powder, and as it gets to the right consistency you'll start to see the texture forming. Now we can add a little bit of colour to it, so let's go in with a tiny bit of the leather colour. Just a little bit of oiliness that creates, just darkening down the colour, a bit more of the texture. You don't need much paint for this, by the way, you just need a really small amount, because it all melds in together, goes on the front like that. There we go. Probably a bit more. It does need quite a lot of talc actually, just to absorb into the paint. There we go, and you can start to see that texture effect happening. Now I'm going to go in with a little bit of the metallic as well. And I'm going to have a little bit of black too. And that talcum powder just adds that texture. Don't worry if you get any on the wheels, you can clean that off later, it's no problem at all. A bit more talc. Just clean off the brush a little bit, just wipe it on there. Done. Set that aside. We can also use the same technique on the front of the frames of the locomotive, so I'll just grab the Loco. And we'll use exactly the same technique just on these frames here. And there we are. That's the texturing done, just on the frames of the W1 there. Not too much, just enough to give it a hint of something that looks worn. And again, I already think that's looking quite nice on that locomotive already. I've just done the same stippling weathering technique on the tender frame as well, just to tie that in. It's a very light covering, just on there, it's just drying at the moment. Just a very light covering of the same sort of thing, just to give a slight amount of texture. This isn't a filthy locomotive by any stretch of the imagination. It's just to give that little bit of definition under the frames there. And we'll do a little bit more work on that later on as well. The next thing that I want to do is apply a weathering wash. You can see I'm wearing a glove here, a white cotton glove, just so when I'm handling the model I don't get my fingerprints all over it. And this is a clay-based weathering wash. This is a water-based wash. It's from Flory Models. I've used these for some years now, and they're really, really good. And what they do, well, you'll see what they do, but basically we paint it all over the model, and being water-based, we then rub it off, and what you end up with is little bits of wash left in all of the recesses. So I'll just brush it off the model, just to clean it down a little bit, and then we'll apply some of this wash over the top. Big brush, and we just go all the way over like that. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, that has surely ruined it. But it doesn't, trust me. It goes on. Don't need it on any of the matte bits, but we can put it on all over the Loco. Make sure you get it in behind the handrails. All on here, like so. And we'll just go all over the model, just like that, and coat it in this stuff. All we do now is let that dry, and then we'll come back and we'll wipe it off, and I'll show you the effect that this stuff achieves. The weathering wash is now completely dry, and it's really important that you leave this wash to dry thoroughly, or else when you start to rub it off, you'll get blank spots in the model itself. And what you need to do once it is dry is to grab an old cloth like this and just start to rub off the weathering wash itself. So we'll start with the tender, first of all, and you can see it's all pretty grimy now. And we'll just moisten the cloth You can just use spit, it doesn't matter, and we'll just start taking the vast majority of the wash off. You can see it comes off really, really easy. It's a clay-based wash, so it has a polishing kind of action as well. And it just leaves behind a little bit of residue. That's all we're after, really. Just a little bit, and I don't even want too much up here. I'm just going to clean most of that away. And you're sort of thinking, what's the point of this? But it just sticks in any recesses. Obviously the side of the tender is pretty flat, so there's not going to be too much in the way of weathering on that. And I'm taking, as I say, the vast majority of this off, and it's just going to stick in any little recesses that are on the model, and we're just polishing it away like so. And once it's dry, just a little bit more just to clean it off. And obviously on the flat sided tender it's not doing too much, but you'll see when we do the, just drying that off a bit there. Just tiny little bits are sticking behind, just behind the panel light, just behind the handrail pillars there. I'll just do the same on the other side just to clean this off. It's really, for the tender it's just a case of evening up the finish a bit, but you'll see a bit more of an effect when we come to actually doing the locomotive itself. So it's just leaving a tiny little bit of residue up in the top of the band of the beading there. We're just removing the vast majority of that off the model, and as I say, it's having a slight polishing effect as well, so it's just working into the surface of the model like that. And for bits that are a bit tricky to get into, we'll use a cotton wool, but that's the tender done, and I'll just put that to one side, and now we'll work on the body, because I think that's really what's going to show this technique best of all. So again, moisten the cloth, and we'll just start working on that like so. And it's just leaving, just in all of those, just around those rivets. It looks a bit darker obviously because we've just moistened it, but it's just taking off. We just rub lightly across the surface of the whole model, just cleaning off most of this stuff, just like so. The vast majority of it comes off, and we're left with just the highlights around the panel lines, which is exactly what we want, just that little hint of dirt. So I'm now going to be quiet, I'm going to finish off the rest of this and we'll have a look at it when it's done. I'm about halfway through the cleaning process now, just removing the excess wash from the model, and what I hope you can see on the photo, on the image, is that we've just now left with this panel line wash effectively in all of the recesses. Still got a bit of cleaning up to do, about halfway through as I say, but it really does create that nice weathered feel, and it's just gathering in those panel lines, and I'm really pleased with how this is turning out so far. What I've got to do now is go around with some cotton wool buds and remove the rest of the weathering wash. It does take a little bit of time. You've got to remove quite a lot of it. As I say, the vast majority of it is being taken off the model. But I'll carry on doing that, and then I'll show you a few stills photos in greater detail and show you the first stage of the weathering, and hopefully all the panel lines will be nice and highlighted, and we'll be well on the way to having a really good looking locomotive. I've fully cleaned off all the weathering wash now, and I think you'll agree from the still photographs as well that it's much improved already. We've done the underframe details, and the weathering wash has been applied. I don't know whether I mentioned it earlier, but it's a good idea if you are going to use the weathering wash to give the locomotive a gloss coat, or at least a satin coat, because if you get the weathering wash onto matte paint, then it doesn't come off so well. So it's quite important to have a nice shiny coat, and that also helps with the general weathering as well, because we want the locomotive to start brand new and then we take it back to a weathered condition. Right, we're going to start our airbrushing now. We're going to work along the top of the locomotive there, and we're going to put in the soot effects that will come from use from the steam and the smoke that comes out of the top of the loco. So we're going to use Tamiya paints for this, it's what I call our permanent weathering, if you like. So the base colour will be a flat black. The lightening colour will be German grey. That's just to take the black just a little bit away from black, because I don't feel that anything really in nature is pure black. And then we're going to add a tiny amount of this one, which is gunmetal, just to give a few metallic hints to the paint. So let's just get some of this in there. So we'll start off with the flat black. Just give that a little stir. Okay, and we'll go straight into the colour cup, just with a few drops of this black. We don't need too much at all. The reason for that is that we're not doing much painting, we're just going to get some colour into the colour cup. So, I don't know, 5 or 6 drops of the flat black. Wipe off the spatula, then into the German grey. Give it a little stir. Okay, good. And that's a bit full of that one, so that's probably enough. Bit of that, like so. And then we'll finish off with just the smallest amount of gunmetal. And when I say a small amount, I mean literally, you know, quarter of a dip, if you want the technical term. So shake that up. X10, Tamiya X10. And you know, coal has that kind of slightly metallic-y look to it. Well, look at this paint. I don't know if you can see that, but it has a really nice metallic sheen to it. We just want a few of those particles just in the colour cup. So literally that much on there and just into there. Mix it up. I just mix it all straight into the colour cup, no problem at all with that. Nice and easy, saves on the cleanup as well. And then I'm going to go in with some thinner, just to thin it down a bit. Just a drop or so of thinner. Like that. And that's our mix. And it's all done, it's all very unscientific. It's all done just off the cuff. And I'm just going to go and mix this up. So I can see just on the end of the spoon there, as I've moved that out, there is just the tiniest hint of metallic. There we go, that's spraying lovely. So let's go and put some of this on the model.